It was not the unauthorized catering vans rolling through the gates before. Dawn that cemented the absolute destruction of Queen Camilla's hidden empire. It was the staggering, unforgivable audacity of where the lighting rigs had been placed. When Princess Anne walked unannounced through the heavy wooden doors of Balmoral Castle, she did not just find a trespassing film crew, she found a commercial production installed inside the historic dining room, adjacent to the very spaces where Queen Elizabeth II had drawn her final breath. The furniture had been shoved aside. The aristocratic silence of Britain's most private royal sanctuary had been replaced by the chaotic noise of contractors, all operating under forged paperwork provided by one man, Camilla's son, Tom Parker Bowles. In less than 60 minutes, everything changed. What Camilla just realized behind closed doors is that the 30-year illusion of her absolute institutional control has just been shattered. This is the story of a secret, highly lucrative power grab executed through fraudulent royal access, and how Princess Anne uncovered the paper trail. It is the story of how the king's sister bypassed family politics, weaponized administrative protocol, and launched a silent, ruthless legal retaliation that exposed the deepest, most heavily guarded secret within the modern monarchy. But above all this is the story of a devastating realization. It is the moment Camilla understood that despite the crown on her head, she actually owns nothing, controls nothing, and cannot save her own bloodline from the cold machinery of royal justice. To understand the sheer magnitude of the trap that just snapped shut, you have to look at the illusion of power Camilla had spent decades meticulously building. For years, she operated under a singular, untested assumption that proximity to King Charles provided a blanket of total immunity for her and her family. She had slowly and carefully worked to elevate her non-royal children, blurring the sacred lines between the bloodline of the monarchy and her own step relations. She believed she had Charles completely controlled, assuming that his historical guilt and devotion to her would force him to suppress any scandal, just as he had done in the past. Because this was not the first time Tom Parker Bowles had required royal shielding, you have to remember the precedent that taught Camilla she was untouchable. In the late 1990s, a young Tom was caught at the center of a massive tabloid scandal, exposed not just for using narcotics, but for allegedly supplying them within elite university circles. Camilla had wept. Charles had quietly managed the damage, and the palace machinery had buried the formal discussions regarding whether Tom was a safeguarding risk to a teenage Prince William. From that moment on, the lesson absorbed by the Parker Bowles family was incredibly dangerous. They learned that royal association meant zero consequences. Armed with that historical protection, Tom built a lucrative culinary and media persona. But behind the cookbook advances and the restaurant reviews was a staggering commercial desperation. Financial investigators looking into his recent operations uncovered a pattern that had been hiding in plain sight. Corporate sponsors and publishers were not paying premium rates for a food critic. They were paying for the Queen consort's son. They were buying access to the royal aura. Tom leveraged palace letterheads, implied endorsements, and the unspoken, a chilling threat that refusing him a favor carried the risk of insulting the king's wife. It was a phantom empire built entirely on borrowed power. But the Balmoral scheme was the moment commercial desperation crossed the line into institutional erasure. Tom approached a high-end production company with an irresistible pitch: exclusive access to film inside Britain's most restricted royal estates. He sat across from investors and claimed that as the son of the Queen, he possessed the unilateral authority to open the doors of Balmoral, Sandringham and Windsor. The money flowed instantly. Hundreds of thousands of pounds moved into his personal accounts as advance payments for access he absolutely did not own. To silence the production company's legal team, Tom took the fatal step of fabricating official authorizations, creating forged documents designed to mimic senior palace approval. He then sent the crew to Scotland, choosing to remain safely in London, completely confident that the royal family's paralyzing fear of public embarrassment would protect his fraud from ever being questioned. He entirely miscalculated Princess Anne. When the Princess Royal walked into Balmoral that morning, the sight hit her like a physical blow. The grand ballroom of that estate had held her mother's coffin. She had sat by the Queen's bedside in those exact rooms. To see a hired film crew adjusting lighting rigs because Camilla's son had sold access to her mother's deathbed for personal profit triggered something far deeper than administrative annoyance. It was a moral outrage of the highest order. Staff members present noted that Anne was physically shaking, radiating a terrifying cold fury. But this is where the story shifts from a family dispute into a masterclass in forensic institutional revenge. Anne Anne did not scream. She did not leak a tearful story to the tabloids. She weaponized her authority with devastating precision. She ordered the entire production off the property within 1 hour, requiring security to physically ensure her eviction orders were met. Then rather than calling Camilla to argue, Anne went straight to the top. She called King Charles to ask one simple lethal question: had he authorized this? Caught completely off guard, a deeply embarrassed King Charles confirmed he knew nothing. By forcing the king to verbally deny knowledge on the record, Anne trapped him. She immediately contacted the royal legal team and instructed them to launch a full, unsparing investigation into Tom's contracts payments and forged authorizations. She used the system to destroy the scheme without ever having to raise her voice in public. The investigation did not just find a single lapse in judgment, it unraveled a multi-year operation of systemic fraud. As the financial forensic unit mapped out the fake documents and the massive sums of money, the true nature of Camilla's nightmare began to take shape. Prince William, who had harbored a deep, quiet hostility toward Tom since those suppressed security warnings in the 90s, he exerted massive private pressure on his father. William's silent, enduring grief for Diana, combined with his mandate to protect Catherine and the future of the crown, culminated in a clear directive to Charles: do not interfere. Let Anne finish this. When Camilla grasped the sheer scale of the legal machinery moving against her son, she abandoned all pretense of royal composure. The illusion of her untouchable status was evaporating in real time, and she went into a state of absolute panic. She marched straight to King Charles, demanding he shut down the investigation under the guise of protecting the monarchy's public image. It was a desperate attempt to use the crown as a shield for private greed. But Princess Anne refused to retreat a single inch. This was no longer just about protecting a Scottish estate. For Anne, this was the perfectly legal, unimpeachable execution of a 30-year reckoning. Decades ago, Anne had watched the bizarre aristocratic love rectangle play out, enduring the quiet humiliation when Andrew Parker Bowles chose Camilla over her in the 1970s. Anne had spent her entire life protecting the crown, even demanding a formal document from Queen Elizabeth confirming she would never have to curtsy to Camilla. Now the law had finally handed Anne the absolute right to stand her ground and dismantle Camilla's overreach. Out of options, Camilla made her most fatal mistake. She attempted to bypass Anne, entirely contacting the palace lawyers directly to order the investigation closed, and allegedly pressuring royal staff to withhold testimony. It was a staggering abuse of power that instantly backfired. The lawyers formally noted her interference, and loyal staff immediately reported her intimidation tactics to Anne. Camilla was suddenly exposed not just as a mother defending her son, but as a queen consort actively attempting to obstruct a criminal fraud investigation involving the king's private property. Trapped, humiliated, and watching the walls of her phantom empire collapse, Camilla turned to the one man who had always fixed her problems. She looked to King Charles to exercise his absolute authority, to overrule his sister, banish the lawyers, and save her son from public ruin. But as the legal briefings piled up and the demands for accountability grew deafening, King Charles did something that Camilla had never anticipated in all their years together. He looked away. When King Charles chose silence, the psychological climax of this entire scandal crystallized in a single devastating moment. Camilla had always relied on the unwritten, unbreakable rule that Charles would burn the institution to the ground to protect her. For 3 decades, he had done exactly that. He had absorbed public hatred, manipulated senior palace aides, gone to war with the British press, and defied his own mother, Queen Elizabeth II, all to legitimize Camilla's place by his side. His obsession with her was the only true currency she possessed. But when she stood in front of him, frantic and demanding that he shut down Princess Anne's legal assault on her son, he did not intervene. He did not issue a royal pardon. He floated in a neutral, agonizing space, paralyzed by the competing forces of his furious sister, his deeply hostile heir, and his own inherent weakness. That hesitation was the ultimate emotional betrayal. It was the moment Camilla understood, perhaps for the very first time, that Charles is an institutionalized monarch, first a man, terrified of Prince William, second, and her husband, third. His silence was not a thoughtful pause to consider the legal ramifications. It was a death sentence for her son's defense. By refusing to formally authorize the filming after the fact, Charles gave Anne the exact leverage she needed to prosecute. To understand why Camilla fought so aggressively, and why Tom Parker Bowles risked federal-level fraud to secure a television deal, you have to look past the royal titles and examine the staggering commercial desperation hiding beneath the surface. It is a reality that is rarely spoken aloud in the British press, but it dictates every single move Camilla makes. The truth is, despite her title, she actually owns nothing. The devastating contrast of Schadenfreude here is impossible to ignore. Camilla wears the crown jewels, but she does not own a single diamond. She sleeps in grand palaces, but her name is not on the deeds. The vast generations spanning wealth of the royal family is locked tightly inside the Duchy of Cornwall, a billion-dollar real estate and investment portfolio that is entirely controlled by Prince William. The private wealth is locked in estates like Balmoral and Sandringham, which currently belong to Charles, but will inevitably pass exclusively to William. If Charles passes away tomorrow, Camilla is left entirely at the mercy of a stepson who has harboured a cold, focused fury toward her bloodline for more than 20 years. She becomes a mere tenant of the crown. That detail matters, it changes the reading of everything. Tom's desperate attempt to monetize Balmoral was not just simple arrogance or a routine business deal gone wrong. It was a frantic cash grab by a family realizing that their access to the royal vault has a rapidly approaching expiration date. They were trying to build independent wealth using the monarchy's most sacred assets before William officially inherits the keys and changes all the locks. And Prince William has already begun changing those locks. What followed Anne's explosive discovery at Balmoral was not just a legal battle over a trespassing film crew. It was a silent, ruthless retaliation executed by the Prince of Wales. William did not go to the press. He did not give a tearful interview to an American network. He weaponized administrative protocol. He initiated sweeping, unsparing audits of royal access across every estate. What looked like a routine administrative update to palace security clearances was actually a total dismantling of Camilla's empire. Suddenly, the Parker Bowles family found themselves quietly, brutally stripped of their presumed authority. The subtle shifts began immediately, and within the royal family, visual humiliation carries devastating deeper meaning. Access passes for Camilla's extended family and associates were quietly downgraded. The ability to bring guests through the main gates was unilaterally revoked, forcing Tom and his network to use side doors and submit to formal security checks like ordinary contractors. Palace insiders noted that specific portraits and photographs featuring Camilla's non-royal family members were quietly moved out of primary reception areas and relocated to private, unseen corridors. It was the absolute physical erasure of the phantom power they had wielded for years. They were being visually managed out of the institution. This is where the story changes, not because Tom Parker Bowles is facing a crushing legal bill, but because of what this means for the legitimate heirs. You must look at the staggering contrast between the Parker Bowles family and the family of Catherine, the Princess of Wales. For years, Catherine has endured uncomplaining sacrifice. She has absorbed the crushing weight of protocol, respected the hierarchy, and quietly protected the institution. When her own parents faced severe financial collapse with their party supply business, they absorbed the ruin privately. They never once leveraged the royal name to bail themselves out. They never sold access. Camilla's son, however, chose staggering exploitation, launching an aggressive push to elevate himself that functioned as a direct threat to the legitimate royal bloodline. It was a subtle but relentless attempt to blur the lines of succession and complete the institutional erasure of Princess Diana's legacy. But William and Anne's unspoken alliance has formally ended that era by dragging Tom into the brutal light of the legal system and forcing him to face public court filings. Anne established a new order. She proved that proximity to the crown is no longer a shield for fraud. And William, by standing firmly behind his aunt and privately threatening to boycott Christmas gatherings if Tom was present, drew a hard line in the sand. He is restoring his mother's legacy, not through emotional outbursts, but through cold, impenetrable institutional control. The legal war over Balmoral continues to grind through the courts, devolving into a messy, exhausting battle over jurisdiction. Tom's highly paid lawyers are desperately trying to argue that Balmoral is private property, subpoenaing decades of historical records to prove that royal family members have always bent the rules. They are even attempting personal attacks, trying to frame Anne as a vindictive woman settling a 50-year-old romantic grudge from when she and Camilla briefly shared the same boyfriend in the 1970s. They're attempting to drown the prosecution in procedural delays and tabloid smears, hoping the palace will eventually run out of stamina. But Anne is funding her legal team with her own private money. She refuses to use crown funds, perfectly insulating herself from accusations of abusing taxpayer money. She has trapped Camilla in a war of attrition she cannot win. Ultimately, the legal outcome in the courtroom almost does not matter anymore. The true verdict has already been delivered inside the palace walls. Camilla may still carry the title of Queen Consort, She may still stand on the balcony at Buckingham Palace and wave to the crowds wearing the historic tiaras. But the illusion of her absolute power has been permanently shattered. She now knows with terrifying clarity that the administrative machinery of the monarchy is controlled by William and Anne. She knows that when the ultimate crisis hits, Charles will look away to protect himself. And she knows that every time she walks through the gilded halls of those ancient estates, she is walking through properties owned by a man who will not hesitate to lock her out the moment he has the power to do so. If you found this deep dive into the hidden power dynamics and silent retaliation of the royal family revealing, please subscribe and leave a comment below. We will continue to track these shifts in power, because the true story of this monarchy is never about what happens in the spotlight. It is about what gets dismantled in the dark,